Hello everyone and welcome to Let's Talk MLOps. My name is Becky and I'm on a mission to find out the latest trends, challenges and prospects within machine learning and with a particular focus on machine learning operations or MLOps. Throughout this series, I'll be talking to experts within the field who will share their knowledge as well as advice for implementing, monitoring and scaling successful machine learning practices. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk MLOps. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of talking to Andy McMahon, who is head of MLOps at NatWest Group. He's the author of the book Machine Learning Engineering with Python and has recently been named Rising Star of the Year at the British Data Awards. Andy, thank you so much for joining today and sharing your wisdom.
No, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't know about wisdom. We'll see. We'll see how it goes, but I'll
It
do my
counts.
best. I'll do my
Why?
best.
Awesome. Okay, so I think a really nice place to start would be a bit about your personal journey into MLOps. I know from what I understand, it's a pretty relatively recent term. So I imagine it came from, more other areas into MLOps.
Yep.
But yeah, a bit about your journey would be great.
Yeah. So I did a PhD in physics a few years ago at Imperial College in London, and during that time, I sort of realised I didn't want to be an academic anymore. So I thought,
Fair enough.
okay, what can I do that's not academic physics? And I looked online, and this was at the time of the Harvard Business Review's article, "Data Scientist, Sexiest Job of the 21st Century." So I thought, okay, that sounds positive. And then the more I looked into what a data scientist was, the more I realized it was all about understanding data, it was about programming, it was about algorithms, it was about statistics, it was about a lot of things that I knew about anyway through what I was doing in my PhD and in my physics background. But what I got really excited about was it was about applying these techniques and this way of thinking and problem solving to problems in any domain. So if you know data,
Yeah.
you could be working in healthcare, logistics, energy, retail, marketing, the list goes on and on. So I got really excited by that. So I thought, right, okay, I'll try and teach myself some stuff. So in my spare time, I was, learning a bit more programming. I was writing stuff, putting it on my GitHub repo. And then eventually I started approaching some companies, approached a startup back home in Glasgow. So we moved back to Glasgow, my wife and I. Um, and I approached this company called Streamba, which are a really great company based in Glasgow, working oil and gas, logistics. And I said, I think I'm pretty smart. I think you could use me doing data stuff. Your website looks cool. Could I get a job? And we had a great conversation, and that led to my first job. And basically, that was the start of the journey. So I joined Streamba as head of data science and machine learning, but it was just me in the department. So just one data scientist, which was me. So it was a very fancy title, but really I was just starting that journey out. And it
Yeah.
was me and I think 11 or 12 software engineers in the company. And that was a real baptism of fire for me because I didn't have a kind of couple of years playing around with algorithms and not really seeing it go anywhere, as I know sometimes happens to data scientists. I got right into, I was being asked, so how are you going to deploy this? How is this going to become a product? Or how's it going to become part of our main product suite? So that was good. So I learned a lot there about not just algorithms and solving a data science problem, but really what we'd say is the start of ML engineering or ML ops, where I started thinking, right, how do I build this into a piece of software I can deploy as an application or part of an application that solves a business need? And then what's the challenges that come with running that? And that kind of carried over into the rest of my career, really. But I would say that was the first piece. So I then, after a few years, went and worked for Agreco, the the company that provides mobile energy generation, so diesel and gas generators, solar cells, etc. For it could be like the World Cup or sporting events or humanitarian disasters, whatever. If you've seen a big diesel generator somewhere, it might have been an Agreco one. So I worked there and eventually worked up to lead their analytics team. And then yeah, the past couple of years I've been in NatWest doing similar things. But as my career's progressed, it's always been about this question about how do I drive maximal impact with what I'm doing? And to me, that was all about building products, deploying products that have the cool machine learning stuff in them, but they're solutions that run every day. You make them robust, reliable, and kind of you monitor them and look after them. And that to me is is really how I got into the
From
place
what
I'm
I
at now.
understand, that's kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I may well be, but that's the core of MLOps, right? It's that it's more pipeline centric rather than the traditional method, right? Which was more model centric. Is that right? So the pipeline
Yeah,
robust, keeping it ongoing.
yeah, I would say so. Yeah. So to me, so it's maybe have a stab at defining MLOps as I kind of see it. So to me, you're right. MLOps is about how you take an existing, or it might be new, but how do you take an existing data science model that solves something in principle, and how do you build something that solves it in practice, robustly, reliably, and scalably? And it's exactly like you said, Becky. So it's how do I wrap that into pipelines rather than it being in Jupyter notebooks or something?
Yeah.
How do I host that? What infrastructure do I need? How do I make that secure? How do I test it thoroughly? And then post deployment, how do I monitor it? And that becomes quite complex because there's some new challenges that aren't in the sort of predecessor of MLOps, which is DevOps.
Yeah.
But that was really focused around traditional software development. So there's a lot of monitoring, for example, in DevOps, but it's about monitoring infrastructure. How much memory are you using? What's the latency of your solution? How fast are things running? In MLOps, you have those questions, but you also have what's the accuracy of my model or
Mm,
precision or whatever the metric is. You have what's the bias that's coming out from my inferences. Am I being biased towards a certain sub demographic, etc.? What's the data quality like feeding the solution? So it's kind of there's all these extra layers. Other ones are like I don't just have code to manage now. I've got models. So when I
mhm,
train a model, I create what's called an artifact, which is a piece of sort of an object, if you like, that represents the knowledge of the model. I have to version that. I have to track it. I have to store it. How do I do that? I maybe need new tools and new processes. Um, and then again, deploying, like you say, is more about pipelines and things. So there's kind of there are big differences, and I think you're right. The core of it is really not just thinking about how you get started driving value from data, but how you take it through to the end and then keep going.
that long term, yeah, that
Yeah,
cycle,
exactly.
hence the logo. Yeah, that a
Yeah,
continual cycle that keeps going. And
exactly.
those the layers that you've mentioned there over the years then that you got more and more into MLOps, have they evolved? Have you seen them change?
Yeah, definitely. So I think a few years ago it was extremely do it yourself for deploying and monitoring and things. Um, but you then started getting tools coming online that were realizing there were certain problems. So a great example was MLflow. So MLflow, to my mind, was the first. It was open source, but it was the first solution you could really use to track the experiments you were running of your models, but then also track and maintain the versions of the models you created. And that's that really first step in MLOps. So you don't just want to run, kind of ad hoc experiments in your notebook and say, I think this is the best one. What you want to do is like have a robust process whereby you automatically track all the information about it. And MLflow provided that. So that created a big kind of splash, I think, because people started thinking, right, how do I then build that into a production system, which is very different. So not just how do I play around and use it to track, and that makes me develop faster, but how do I then use that to do things when my pipelines are automated and I want to run experiments in an automated fashion and track it. So I think that was the start of the journey, but it was very much you still had to do it yourself around that. There were
Yeah.
so many other things you had to think about monitoring, for example, of the performance. You'd have to build your own pipelines to go in and check how your models are performing. Now there's like a massive suite of tools out there. There's entire platforms, entire companies dedicated to MLOps who say we will help you solve either this specific or this general aspect of MLOps. And I think as well, complementary to the tooling, there's been a maturing of the industry, if you like, because the challenge is no longer how do you build processes to productionize? So how do you build processes to deploy the solution the first time? And that's kind of where a lot of people now can get to. There was a statistic a few years ago saying 87% of data science projects failed to go into production or create value. I think that's a lot lower now, but the problem now isn't how do you just get it into production, it's what do you do afterwards? How do you get the next iteration of the model into production? How do you decide it's time to retrain or swap it out? How do you do all the monitoring and stuff? I said so. There's been a recognition, I think, in the industry that that's the challenge now. The challenge has sort of moved downstream a bit. So I think yeah, it's totally changed. And now you've got things like there's roles like ML engineer, ML ops engineer. There's all these new terms.
How
Um,
long has that term been around, would you say, that specific MLOps engineer? Is it only like within, I don't know, is it the past 2 years or even less
yeah,
when
no, I think it'd be past couple of years. I don't remember when I started out. There's maybe the odd person a couple of years in who would say they were an ML engineer, but it might have been at like Facebook or Netflix or something. Would have really been in your normal data science team. The question was how do data scientists productionize, and then it's now how do you do ML engineering and ML ops engineering.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
it's definitely a new thing. But an important point for me, and this is something I say a lot to people I work with
mm,
or on chats like this, is it's important we don't just displace the idea of a unicorn to that role. So we had like the data scientist unicorn before, where someone knew business and computing and statistics and algorithms and everything, and they could just do everything. I think it's important we don't just think an ML engineer is a different flavor of a unicorn, but we sort of recognize that ML ops is more a culture and a set of practices, and that should come from a blended team.
right, rather
So
than one person who's responsible for all of those, like
yeah,
every,
yeah,
yeah,
you're
yeah,
not going to hire an ML engineer or three ML engineers and your problems will be solved. Really, you have to understand what does ML ops mean? What are you trying to do? And then it could be you do that with a team of data scientists. Just some of them have an aptitude for certain parts of the software engineering process, or you do it with software engineers and you
yeah,
sort of working with data scientists, and we just all complement each other. I'm a big fan of diverse teams in general, anyway, but it's important that you have diversity of those sort of flavors of roles as well. You can't just hire, because we got into this trouble a few years ago as an industry. Just hire some data scientists and you'll make value from data.
yeah.
And then there was a big kind of the bubble burst slightly, and now it's just hire some ML engineers and you'll get value from your data. I think it's important we challenge that a bit and just be sensible about it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And in terms of the tools that you mentioned ML Flow, was it? Are there
Yeah.
like what other are there other tools that you think, you can't live without in terms of MLOps, or is that the base? Or
I think there's so many now, so many. What I kind of and there's so many with different kind of offerings. So there's the open source tooling. So you're talking about things like I mentioned MLflow. You can get enterprise versions of that hosted on things like Databricks, but you get the open source MLflow instance. You can go and download and install it. There's other things like Alibi Detect, which is a package I quite like and talk about in my book a little bit, where you can do basically build monitoring pipelines, but using this kind of open source package. Um, there's also Evidently AI, which does a similar thing. So within a few lines of Python code, really, you can start generating reports and charts and things about how your model's performing. So they're quite powerful, but they're very much the open source space, and focused on specific aspects of MLOps. You then move into things that are a bit more pipeline focused. So about how you chain all these steps together. And these are things again could be open source, like there's ZenML, there's Kubeflow, which is based on Kubernetes. So there's these sort of pipelining tools as well. But then you get into maybe more enterprise level solutions, and there's just tons and tons of them. But as an example, AWS, Amazon Web Services, we've done a lot of work and spoken publicly about our work in NatWest with AWS and using SageMaker, which is their ML pipelining tool. But they have a variety of tools around that for MLOps things. They obviously pay for as you consume them, but you get certain other things from that. So there's just so many
yeah.
tools tackling each aspect, and it's very easy for people to get analysis paralysis, as I say. And I think the most important thing is actually to step back from that and think, what are the processes and steps I need to do? So I need to build something that trains, I need to build something that monitors, I need to build something that manages models, etc. And then now it's possible to build that either DIY all the way through to you literally just pay someone as a company to do a kind of drag and drop thing. So many options available.
Yeah. And they'll all have their pros and cons, like you said, but you don't want to. I suppose it's finding the balance of not getting too stuck into the analysis, like you said, of which one. I mean, do you ever recommend trying different ones and seeing which ones are the best for your specific projects, or is
Yeah,
that
100.
again
Yeah, hundred
just
percent. Yeah, I would always start open source,
okay?
um, and even to play around and understand again those process questions. Because I think once you've nailed them and you have a good system design and a good process flow, you can swap in and out tools based on what. And we've tried to do this in the bank, and it's kind of a generally a good principle, right? From a software architecture point of view, is your architecture says what things have to hang together. It shouldn't be too dependent on any one tool. It's more, I need something here in this block that does this, and it's connected to this thing that does this, and they'll talk to each other this way. But that might mean there's, 4 options for this block and 4 options for this block, and it's really about experimenting, as you say, and trying the best. And I would say starting open source is always the easiest way to experiment. It won't necessarily fit all your needs. So if you're a large organization that's heavily regulated, for example, in finance or healthcare, etc., taking an open source based approach might not get you all the way to building that product, but it might at least get you started and playing
Hmm.
around with, right, here's the sort of thing I need. Now, is there an option that's, got enterprise level security, or someone can offer a layer around it that offers that, etc. So I would always start open source, play around, and then you can make better decisions later once you're more informed about the processes rather than the specifics of any one tool.
Awesome, thanks. And then I mean, you've mentioned the sort of challenge on wanting to make sure that it doesn't turn into another unicorn situation. Aside from that, what are some of the other current challenges you think within MLOps? And how are you, or maybe your team together, as you mentioned, it's important to have that whole team working together. What are you doing to solve them, or what can
Yeah,
people do to solve them?
yeah. I'll maybe think from a kind of an industry wide view as I see it. So I think the big the big challenges that are upcoming for me, um, are very much going to be around not. I think like I mentioned, getting things into production.
Mhm.
It's not as became second nature, but I think it's a lot easier for most teams to do. The challenge now is not just tools and other things, and but what are the processes and how do you organize your team to look after ML products? So I think we're going to see a lot of teams have to transform a bit, because if you're just the not just, but if you're a sort of data science outfit and you only think about the targets to get it into production, but now you're being told no, it's your job to run that 365 days a year, and it has to have 90% uptime, 99% uptime, and we need service level agreements, which is when you say if it goes down, it needs to
Mm.
be up and running in an hour. A lot of data science teams aren't fit for that as they stand. That's usually been a purview of DevOps teams or software engineering teams, site reliability engineering, etc. There's lots of other software domains where that's bread and butter. But I think for the data science world, it's not there yet. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge over the next few years is really how do you how do you change how you're organized, and how do you start understanding where your blended team is sort of what's the complement, how they should be focused one way or the other.
And what's the reason, do you think, that they're not there yet, whereas other teams might be?
I think it's just the focus hasn't been there because we've not had enough things go into production yet to feel that. I think we're now in the cusp of getting into production has been a problem that was there, and it's now been catered for by the industry. Everyone's, there's a lot of great stuff out there about it on in books and blogs and tutorials and courses. We've kind of started building this set base of knowledge of how to do that. That
Mhm.
set base of knowledge for the stuff that comes after is not quite there. So it's just not been the focus yet. So I think it's a natural evolution. I don't think it's like the industry's missed a trick. I think it's more teams and organizations, to my mind, need to be aware that will require more change to adapt to what this means now. So it's just a different question, and it might mean that some interesting things happen, like you know some organizations already do this, but it might mean that the model where a data scientist and an ML engineer, whatever, being seeded within a product team is more effective than having a core data team,
Yeah.
because the idea is you're sort of closer to what needs to happen, what needs to be built to build a product. It could be there's other sort of flavors of team structure that have to come online. But yeah, it's really been, I think it's a natural evolution, because the first challenge was, you know, how do we even do data science was the first
Yeah.
challenge. The next next challenge was, okay, how do we do data science in a way that generates some value, or we go into production? And now it's like, how do we keep generating the value day in, day out?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a natural evolution, I think.
And are they more, are they challenges that you foresee carrying on into the future? They, would you say they affect now and they will continue to affect going on as well? Or is that more looking to the future only?
No, I think it's a good question. I think that will be the thing for the next few years. Another challenge that I didn't mention, but I think's equally or maybe more important, is I can only see the pace of change of technology accelerating. Um, and a really, we'll maybe come back to this, but a really interesting thing I've been thinking about a lot is obviously the stuff with ChatGPT and OpenAI's
I was
large language models.
playing around with it earlier. It's
It's
incredible.
amazing, right? It's
Yeah.
amazing, and I think I've got whole other thoughts about how does MLOps work in this new large language model world, but I think that shows how quickly things are moving,
Yeah.
and the teams that are going to succeed are going to be the ones that are more adaptable and flexible. So it's probably even the more meta challenge, if you like, is
Yeah.
not just what's my team structure to get things in an MLOps way, but how do I make sure my organization is geared up to be flexible, to change as I need? Because you don't know what's going to come out in 2 years. I'm really, I'd be shocked if anyone predicts accurately. There's
Yeah. Yeah.
already really crazy things out there, so I don't know what's going to happen in 2 years. So the key thing to be a winner will be if you are adaptable.
That's part of the excitement, though, isn't it? When it's when it's not predictable and you have no idea what's
Absolutely,
literally around the corner. I mean,
absolutely.
and most of these challenges, most of what you said, it's at a team level, right, rather than an individual level. Do you think,
Oh yeah,
or even at company wide level, sort of
yeah,
company wide and team, much less than the individual? Maybe like you mentioned, not just having an MLOps engineer and putting all the focus on them.
yeah,
Is that fair to say? It's much more of a team.
yeah. 100%. I think because the nature of work now, the nature of science as well, kind of going a bit wider, is it's not the lone person who's going to have a eureka moment, and so everybody has to work in teams.
Yeah.
Sometimes distributed teams, sometimes massive teams, sometimes small teams. Um, that's not going away. That's only going to intensify. So work is inherently now deeply collaborative. Um, what will be interesting as well will be that part of your team will be AI soon. In the term, ChatGPT, these other things, right? They will be part of your team. The people who know how to work with those solutions, as well as other people, are the ones who'll drive most value. But yeah, I totally, I'm a big believer in that. I think there's a lot of smart people out there. There's a huge demand for talent in the data area generally. Um, but I think if you just put smart people in a room, sometimes magic happens, sometimes it doesn't. What's important is you put smart people in a room and you have some sort of structure, strategy, vision for them to
Yeah.
go after. Then great things will happen. I do think that's such an important challenge over the next few years.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And just to go back a tiny bit to where you did mention Chat GPT and that sort of it is GPT, right? Is that right?
GPT, yeah.
Yeah.
What did I say? Did I
No,
say
no,
GTP?
you did. No, I think I don't know. I just wanted
Yes,
to check because I keep saying GTB and then GB. Yeah. So
I
it's
think it's
GPT,
General
isn't it?
Pre-trained Transformer or Generative Pre-trained Transformer. So it's GPT. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, that's the right one. You said it is. You started to mention it. There are some interesting factors with Chat GPT linked with MLOps. Were you saying like it is?
Yeah, yeah. So the family of models that ChatGPT is based on, which are the GPT models, but more generally, there's a family of models called large language models.
Yes,
And
I
the
have
I
heard of them.
yeah, and there's been like ones like Meta released Galactica and they got a big backlash, but there's been a few of these models, right? And the fundamental idea is that scale will give you more capabilities of this artificial neural network. So it's not about fancier architecture, although it uses transformers, which have taken the world by storm the past few years. But the idea is just make them bigger and feed them more data and see where they go. And they've found that it can do incredible things. So the the interesting challenge I see from an ops point of view,
Mm,
ops generally, is, and OpenAI have came out and other people have came out and said this, right? So there's questions around accuracy. How do you, these LLMs as they're called, they're very good at synthesizing because they're generative models. They generate new stuff, but their job is not to generate new accurate stuff.
mm,
Their job is to generate new plausible stuff because the way they're trained is through sometimes what's called adversarial networks. So the idea is you have one model. The idea is just testing, is what you're spitting out reasonable? Does it seem like normal text? And then the LLM spits out more text. And eventually that's how it fine tunes. So the idea is when you ask ChatGPT or another LLM a question, the answer might look super plausible, but is it accurate? And a lot of people have found it's not. So I saw a case where a doctor on Twitter, I saw this, a doctor wrote a letter. I don't know if it's to a patient or to a colleague,
mm.
but he got ChatGPT to pull out some medical facts and give citations and stuff. It was all garbage. It wasn't right. But there's kind of, so there's operational questions around how do you put in other mechanisms to test that. And I think all of these companies building these LLMs are working on this very hard. There's a lot of great stuff that's going to come, but I'm very interested in, if your organization starts using these models, how would you convince your stakeholders and your customers that you're guarding against that? There was other stuff like these models can sometimes, because they're trained on like the internet, right? The
Mm.
internet can be a bad place. So
Yeah,
they
yeah.
sometimes spit out very racist or sexist, things.
Their own biases. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. They can spit out bias stuff, exactly. And it's like, how are we going to build safeguarding mechanisms to check for that? Not just trust the people supplying these models, because we're going to enter a paradigm where these large models can't be trained by, or we're already there, but like most organizations can't train these models unless that's their focus.
Right.
So if you're a bank or something, you can't spend like $10 million training a neural network that might not work. What you're
Yeah.
going to do is you're going to go and use an API to call this model, but you're still probably going to have your own checks and balances in place so
Yeah.
that your stakeholders and customers trust this stuff. So I think that's a big MLOps challenge that I'm starting to think about, is in this new world of really large models for, could be text, but could be so many other things. Um, how are we going to create these checks and balances? How are we going to make sure that we can trust them? Because with simpler models, it's a bit easier. Still been a challenge for neural networks forever, but there are mechanisms and tools you can use. So do these apply, or do we need to think of something else? So I think that's a really interesting
Awesome.
challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I hadn't even, it was literally this morning. It was the first time I had a go just to see. And,
Mm.
even obviously, as you know, I'm not an engineer, so my knowledge is very limited. But, from my perspective, it was the best, sort of chat bot I've ever spoken
Yeah.
to. And it's interesting that you mentioned the accuracy, because I didn't even think of the accuracy, if that makes sense. I was
Yep.
only looking at the fact of, wow, the point that from all other perspectives, from a linguistic perspective,
Yep.
it's perfect. It all makes sense linguistically. Everything's in the right place,
Yep.
and you're impressed by that. And obviously, that this was just on a personal scale, not on a professional scale. But I didn't even think, because I was asking questions. I think it says it's only trained until 2021, right? That's when the training stopped. So
Yeah.
it has knowledge of the
Exactly.
world up until then, but I didn't even question how accurate the information was.
Yeah.
So that's a really, really
Yeah.
interesting point.
Yeah. There's some really good tools that are already, you can see, that are trying to basically challenge some of these questions. So there's Web Chat GPT is a version of Chat GPT that's connected to the web, and it does something like it queries DuckDuckGo, which is a search engine, gets the results, and then injects that into the query. So it kind of starts making things a bit more real. There's also something I saw earlier called Perplexity AI, which I think is a demo, but it's really cool. It's like a search bar, but when you search I think it's using an LLM to generate a summary, but then it gives you citations so you can see the sources. So it's like there's people solving a lot of these problems, but
Yeah, yeah.
I still think there's going to have to be monitoring and tooling put in place. And there's other questions like, can you get hold of these large language models and fine tune them on your own data, which I think you can do for things like GPT-2, which was an older version. So it's just questions about how do you do that efficiently, because it costs a lot of money to train and run inference for these things. So there's
Yeah, I can
lots
imagine.
of fun
So many,
challenges.
so many. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But like you said, they're exciting challenges as well, right? Lots of
Yeah,
problems to solve, and how can we
yeah,
deal with it? Awesome. On an organizational level, or on a team level as well, what would you say are like one or two of the biggest mistakes that people or organizations make when they want to implement MLOps into their teams, into their pipelines?
yes. I say that two things that are related in a way. So one is focus on tools, and I know I kind of spoke a lot about tools at the beginning, but that's that's where the conversation was. But I think to the point earlier, if organizations worry too much about what's the perfect tool, they miss the real point, which is what are the processes and the vision and how you organize yourself, because tools will come and go and you can swap them in and out. The related thing is, I think, thinking it's a silver bullet, and that, oh, once once we have MLOps, everything will be great.
It'll all be sorted.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's very dangerous thinking, I think. So it's just important. It's important for people to understand it's, like I said at the top of the call, it's more about a culture,
Mm.
a way of thinking. It's a set of
Concept.
practices.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
But
a,
it's
yeah,
more,
concept.
yeah, it's more about how you're doing things. And one thing I think that's true, I said this in a previous interview before, was people sometimes think, oh, it's now time to do ML ops because we've been doing machine learning for a few years. But I would argue you've always been doing ML ops. You've just been doing it badly, because
Yeah.
if you put something in production and it's running, that's an operational question. It might
Yeah.
just be you've not worried too much about it, which just means you're doing poor ops, you know, or it might be you're not getting into production, which
There are
again is an,
different levels, right? Sorry to
yeah,
jump in. I just
no, no, yeah,
reminded me, I'm sure I saw before there were sort of different levels of the MLOps implementation in an organization, right? You can sort of, is it 0 to 4, something like that, with
there's,
how much it's
yeah,
implemented?
there's tons of these different maturity models.
Yeah.
So like you see them on, and Google have shared theirs, Amazon have shared theirs, Microsoft probably shared theirs. But yeah, there's different maturity models floating around, and it's exactly that. They say you start from zero, where do you go up to? Um, and exactly, I think it's important for people to realize that zero doesn't necessarily mean, oh, now we're starting to think about, now ops is a thing. It's like ops has always been a thing. It's just now you're talking about how you become more mature at it. So I think that's important as well. And don't think it's don't sort of rerun what the industry did. So I mentioned earlier, the industry sort of solved the problem of going into production and then solved other problems.
Mm.
I almost think it is good to think about some of the other problems ahead of time. So it's things that are always going to be beneficial. Good software development practices. They'll help you no matter what stage of the journey you're in. Tracking the experiments you're running, always going to be a good thing, right? And just thinking about these things ahead of time will mean you get ahead of the challenges that will come up later, I think.
Awesome, thank you. And then I guess just for those who are really interested in and want to have more of an MLOps focus in their career but haven't got there yet, what are the kind of, I don't know, maybe the skills that they should work on or important for them to have? What's important for them, would you say? The ones who want to take that step?
Yeah. So I think it might depend on their background, but let's assume it's a sort of data scientist typically. I think a data scientist will be someone who understands algorithms, understands how to take data and solve a sort of a business problem translated to a mathematical, statistical machine learning problem. The bits that then make you go more into ML engineering or ML ops is starting to, like you mentioned earlier, Becky, think about pipelines. So what are the structures you need to build in your code around these models in order to orchestrate them? So host them somewhere and trigger them on a schedule or however, and run them. So that then feeds into things like I mentioned orchestration. How do you orchestrate? So start thinking about what are the ways that people trigger pipelines to run. So there's tools like Apache Airflow as a big one. There's now lots of other tools, but how do you start thinking about, right, I've got a model, I've put it in a pipeline, but how do I trigger the pipeline? And then things like where's the data coming from and where's the output going? And what are the different options for that? And that then leads you into questions like what's the infrastructure things are running on? How do I set this up on the cloud? And I would say it's like I mentioned earlier, it's about if you can use open source to do that, that's great. If you want to jump on the cloud, all of the public clouds, the big ones have like free credits when you start. They have a lot of free services as well. You know, sorry, not free credits, they have free tiered services. So certain things where if you use them not too much, you don't get charged. Those are all great ways to get started and start playing around. But it's really just the fundamental thing you're driving at is if you're making a model, a product, what are the steps you would need to do? And it's all of those. How do you wrap it? How do you host it? How do you trigger it? How do you monitor it? And that really makes you an MLOps engineer, in my view.
Awesome. Thank you. I think just one more question. I think we've probably only got time for. So I guess then looking forward to the next year or next year and a half, what are the biggest trends that you can see? I know you said like only a couple of minutes ago, it's really hard to predict, especially in the world of MLOps. So no pressure, but in terms of what do you feel most excited about, or what the biggest trends you think could be around the corner, or things you can see already starting to happen?
Yeah. I think I'm very excited about machine learning, AI becoming even more ubiquitous in our sort of lives. And the challenge there is to make sure that's a positive thing. So there's already been lots of stuff before, Cambridge Analytica, lots of other things talking about, creating a bit of a tech backlash. But I think the things we're working on with data have an enormous potential to change how we live and work in a very positive way. So I think as these capabilities become more and more evolved, as people understand them more, they'll start filtering more into the products that we have in our daily lives. And I think I'm excited by that prospect. I think, as I say, the challenge is making sure that we as a society are happy they're doing positive things, and also for the general, I think for the general public to become more educated about these things, which is difficult, right? It's not easy. So I think there's an onus on us as the community, and this is why podcasts like this one are good, right? There's an onus on there's an onus on us as a community to make sure we're educating wider society about what we're doing, why we're doing it, how it's beneficial. So I think that's the main one that I'm excited about. It's just I think the operationalization, if that's the word, of ML will just become second nature to all of us because we'll have it in so many products. It will not just be in our voice assistants; it'll be everywhere. And
Everywhere, everything, yeah.
everything, and we're getting there now. But like again, coming back to ChatGPT and stuff, that's been really good for getting the public, the wider public, really engaging with an artificial intelligence tool and sort of asking questions about it and thinking, "Oh my God, this is quite powerful. What does this mean?"
Yeah.
And I think I'm quite excited by the questions that brings up for kind of the wider future. So that's a bit of a meta or philosophical answer, but I think that's what I'm
We
excited
can
about.
we can dive into philosophy.
We can do
That's
that. We
fine.
can
There's
go there.
nothing bad about that. Although it is the end now, so you
All right,
just
we
just
can't do that. We
round it
can't do
off.
that.
No, but I think we will have to end it there. But thank you so so much. I think we can also safely say that was wisdom. That counts as wisdom. That
We'll see.
everything
I'll
given.
listen back. See how many
Um,
times I face palm. Yeah.
No, but like you were saying, sharing with the community, and that's the main reason I wanted, and I've started this podcast just as well, selfishly to learn, but just mainly to share with everyone, from all walks of life and in their journey into MLOps, however far they are into it. So yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great.
You're very welcome. Thank you to everyone watching as well. Hope to see you soon. Bye. Let's end with a little bit about Logic. At Logic, we recruit specifically within the machine learning engineering and research fields in the UK, Canada, and the US. We pride ourselves on our innovative, community led approach and having a deep knowledge and understanding of the roles that we recruit for. That's one of the reasons why I've started this podcast. If you're looking for your next professional challenge, or on the other hand, you might be an organization looking to expand your machine learning team, then please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message. Alternatively, you can send me an email to becky@logic.com. Let's set up a call for a chat, or we can meet in person for a coffee.